The girl ran through the forest, and the snow beneath her feet turned red. Rose Gardner was 17 years old. She had been born without a voice, born into a world that did not wait for those who could not speak. And now she ran through the winter dark with blood streaming from her temple, her mouth open in a scream that made no sound. Her hand clutching a leather-bound book against her chest like it was the last piece of her mother's heart. Behind her, flashlights cut through the pine trees. 3 men, their boots crunched in the snow, their voices carried on the wind like the baying of wolves. "Stop running, deaf girl. You can't hear us, but you can't outrun us either." Rose could not hear them, but she felt the vibrations of their pursuit through the frozen earth. She felt the way the air changed when they got close. She had lived her whole life reading the world through tremors and shadows, and right now, every nerve in her body screamed one word: run. She stumbled. Her foot caught on a root hidden beneath the snow. The book flew from her hands and landed in a drift of white. Rose fell hard, her palms scraping against ice and stone. She crawled forward, fingers numb, reaching for the book because her mother had died for it, and she would not let her mother's death mean nothing. A boot came down on her wrist. Rose looked up. The man standing over her had a scar running down his left cheek, a canyon of old violence carved into his face. Mason Cord. She had seen him before 3 nights ago, standing in her doorway, with eyes like winter. Mason bent down. His lips moved. Rose could not hear the words, but she understood the meaning. "Give me the book." She shook her head. Mason grabbed her hair and yanked her head back. His other hand reached for the book. The gunshot came from somewhere in the darkness. Mason's shoulder exploded in a spray of red. He screamed and fell clutching the wound, his blood staining the snow in a pattern like scattered roses. Rose looked up and saw the rider. Silas Thorne sat on his horse 50 yards away, smoke rising from the barrel of his Winchester rifle. He was a large man, broad across the shoulders, with a face carved by weather and grief. His eyes found Rose through the darkness, and something passed between them that had no name. Mason's 2 companions turned and ran. Silas did not fire again. He let them go. This was not about killing. This was about sending a message. Silas dismounted and walked toward Rose. She sat frozen in the snow, unable to move, unable to process what was happening. Her stepfather, the man she had lived with for 3 years but never truly known. The man she had resented for taking her mother's attention, for sleeping in the bed where her real father had once slept. Now he knelt beside her in the snow, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he helped her stand. Silas looked at the book she clutched. Then he looked past her toward the distant orange glow on the horizon. Their cabin was burning. Rose followed his gaze and felt something break inside her chest. A sound wanted to come out, but her throat was locked, her voice a prisoner in her own body. She opened her mouth, and nothing came forth but silence. Silas picked her up like she weighed nothing. He set her on his horse and climbed up behind her. Rose turned back once, watching the flames consume her home, and then Silas spurred the horse forward, and they rode into the night. Behind them, Mason Cord lay in the snow, bleeding and beaten, and somewhere in the darkness his companions were running back to their master to deliver the news. The girl had escaped, and she had the book, 2 hours before the blood. The cabin sat in a clearing between 2 mountains, small and sturdy, built from timber that Silas had cut himself. Smoke rose from the chimney in a lazy curl. Inside, warmth. Inside the last moments of a family that did not know it was about to die. Sarah Gardner. Thorne stood at the stove stirring a pot of stew. She was 38 years old but looked older, her beauty worn down by years of hardship and secrets. Her hands shook slightly as she worked. They had been shaking for 3 days, ever since the men came to her door. Rose sat at the table writing in a notebook. This was how mother and daughter spoke. Rose would write. Sarah would read. Sarah would write back. A conversation in ink instead of sound. Rose held up the notebook. "Mother, I saw strangers in town today. They were asking about you. Is something wrong?" Sarah read the words. Her hands tightened on the spoon. She took the notebook and wrote carefully. "Nothing is wrong, my love. Just travelers passing through." Rose studied her mother's face. Even without hearing, she could read the lie in Sarah's eyes. But she did not press. She had learned long ago that her mother kept secrets the way other people kept treasures, locked away in dark places where questions could not reach. The door opened. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of pine and snow. Silas entered a deer slung over his shoulder. He was a quiet man, economical, with words more comfortable with silence than most people were with speech. He nodded to Sarah, nodded to Rose, hung the deer on the hook by the door. "Good hunt?" Sarah asked. "Good enough." Silas washed his hands in the basin. He looked at his wife and saw the tension in her shoulders, the way she avoided his eyes. Something was wrong. He had been a soldier once, a lawman before that. He knew the signs of fear. "You want to tell me what's bothering you," he said. "Nothing is bothering me." "Sarah." She turned to face him. Her eyes were wet. "Please, Silas, not now, not in front of Rose." Silas glanced at Rose, who was watching them both with the peculiar intensity of someone who must rely on sight alone. The girl saw everything. She always had. Dinner was quiet. They ate the stew with bread that Sarah had baked that morning. Rose wrote a few comments about her day. Sarah responded. Silas ate and said nothing, but his mind was working, turning over possibilities, preparing for trouble, the way a soldier prepares for battle. After dinner, Silas sat by the fire with Rose. This was their routine. Every night he would practice lip reading with her, speaking slowly, carefully, so she could follow the shape of his words. It was frustrating work. Rose had been deaf since birth, born into absolute silence. She had learned to read lips by necessity, by watching her mother's mouth form words again and again until the patterns made sense. But it was imperfect. She caught perhaps half of what was said, filled in the rest through context and intuition. With Silas it was harder. His beard obscured his mouth. He spoke curtly, economically, a man unused to conversation. Sarah had been better at this. Sarah had exaggerated every syllable, made her face expressive, repeated things without being asked. Silas tried, but trying and succeeding were different things. "Can you understand me?" Silas said, exaggerating each syllable. Rose nodded. She wrote, "Yes, but you still don't understand me." "I'm trying." "Mother understands me. Only Mother." The words stung more than Rose probably intended. Silas had been in this girl's life for 3 years and still felt like a stranger. He had married Sarah out of loneliness, and Sarah had married him out of necessity. She needed protection. He needed purpose. But love, that had not been part of the arrangement. "Your mother is a remarkable woman," Silas said. Rose wrote, "She is sad lately. She pretends she isn't. But I see. I see it too." "Can you help her?" Silas looked at the girl, 17 years old, deaf since birth, mute since birth. But her eyes were ancient, full of an understanding that transcended words. "I'll try," he said. Upstairs, Sarah sat alone in the bedroom she shared with Silas. She opened a wooden chest, pushed aside old clothes, and removed a bundle of letters tied with string. On each envelope the same name, Judge E. Harlow, Copper Bluff Mining Company. She opened one letter, though she had read it 100 times before. Her hands trembled as she traced the words. The letter was from Vincent Gardner, her first husband, Rose's father by choice, if not by blood. "My dearest Sarah," the letter began. "If you are reading this, I am dead. You must protect Rose. You must hide what I have found. Judge Harlow is not who he pretends to be. The mine accidents are not accidents. I have proof. I have written everything in my diary. Every name, every death, every stolen ounce of gold. Hide it. Trust no one. Not the sheriff, not the deputies. Harlow owns them all. When the time is right, bring the truth to light. But protect our daughter first. Always Rose first. I love you both. Vincent." Sarah folded the letter. She had kept this secret for 4 years. 4 years since Vincent died in what they called a mining accident. 4 years of knowing the truth and being too afraid to speak it. But now they had found her. Somehow Harlow knew she had Vincent's diary, and he would not stop until he had it. A knock at the door downstairs. Sarah stood quickly, shoved the letters back into the chest. She could hear Silas moving below his heavy footsteps crossing to the door. She heard voices, men's voices. She hurried down the stairs. 3 men stood in the doorway. Mason Cord in front, 2 others behind him. All of them wore heavy coats dusted with snow. All of them wore guns on their hips. Silas stood between them and his family hand resting casually on the rifle propped beside the door. "Gentlemen," Silas said, "it's late for visiting." Mason smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "Mr. Thorne, we apologize for the intrusion. We're here to speak with Mrs. Thorne. Business matter." "What kind of business?" "Private business. Regarding her late husband." Sarah stepped forward. "I have no business with anyone regarding Vincent. He died 4 years ago." "We work for Judge Harlow," Mason said. "He would like to speak with you tomorrow at his office in Copper Bluff. It concerns some property that may have belonged to your first husband." "I don't have any property." Mason's smile widened. "Perhaps we could discuss this inside, out of the cold." "No," Silas said. The word was flat final. "You've delivered your message. Now you leave." Mason looked at Silas with the assessment of a man sizing up an opponent. "You must be the new husband." "Silas Thorne. Used to be a deputy in Copper Bluff, didn't you? About 5 years back?" Silas said nothing. "Heard you left sudden-like, middle of the night. Nobody knew why." "That's old history." "History has a way of catching up," Mason said. He tipped his hat to Sarah. "Mrs. Thorne, Judge Harlow doesn't like to wait. He'll expect you tomorrow, 10 o'clock. Don't disappoint him." The 3 men turned and walked back into the night. Silas watched until they disappeared into the trees, then closed and barred the door. He turned to Sarah. "Now you tell me everything." Sarah looked at Rose, who stood at the top of the stairs watching. The girl had not heard the conversation, but she had seen enough to know that danger had arrived at their door. "Rose," Sarah said. "Go to bed, sweetheart." Rose shook her head. She walked down the stairs and took her mother's hand. Sarah sat at the table. Silas sat across from her. Rose sat between them, her eyes moving from one face to the other, reading the story in their expressions. "Vincent didn't die in an accident," Sarah said. "He was murdered by Judge Harlow." Silas leaned back. His face showed nothing, but his mind was racing. "Vincent worked in Harlow's mine," Sarah continued. "He kept detailed records of the ore yields. He noticed discrepancies. Tons of gold that never made it into the official reports. He started investigating. He found out that Harlow was stealing from his own mine, cooking the books, hiding millions in profits. And when miners got suspicious or saw too much, Harlow had them killed. Made it look like cave-ins and accidents." "How many?" 12 men that Vincent knew of. Maybe more. "And Vincent had proof," Sarah nodded. "He kept a diary. Everything he saw, everything he discovered. Names, dates, amounts. Enough to hang Harlow 10 times over." Silas was quiet for a long moment. "Where is this diary?" Sarah stood. She went to a cabinet, moved aside some dishes, and pulled out a small leather-bound book. She placed it on the table. "Vincent hid it before he died. I found it 6 months later, tucked into the rafters of our old house. He left me a note with it. Told me to keep it safe. Told me to never trust the law because Harlow owns the sheriff, owns the deputies, owns everyone in Copper Bluff." Silas opened the diary. The handwriting was neat, methodical. He read a random entry aloud. "March 15th, 1885. 2 more men dead today in Shaft 7. Official report says support beam collapse. But I examined the site. I found traces of dynamite. They blew the shaft deliberately to hide evidence of the gold they'd already removed. Harlow was there within an hour, ordering the shaft sealed. The bodies are still inside. No one will dig them out. No one will ask questions. I have copied the yield reports, the real numbers versus what Harlow filed. The difference is staggering. He has stolen over $2 million in the last 18 months alone." Silas closed the diary. He looked at Sarah. "Why didn't you come forward with this?" "I was afraid. And I had Rose to protect. Vincent's note said to wait until I found someone I could trust, someone outside Harlow's reach." "And you thought that was me." "I thought you could protect us. That's why I married you, Silas. I needed someone strong enough to stand between my daughter and the men who killed her father." Rose had been watching their lips move, reading the tension in their bodies. She took her notebook and wrote quickly. "What are you talking about? What's happening?" Sarah took the notebook. She hesitated, then wrote, "The men who came tonight want something that belonged to your father, something dangerous." Rose wrote back, "Father is dead." "Yes, but what he knew is still alive." Rose looked at the diary on the table. She reached for it, but Sarah pulled it away. "Not yet, sweetheart. You don't need to know all of this." But Rose's eyes were sharp, insistent. She wrote, "If people died for this, I should know why." Before Sarah could respond, there was a crash from the front of the house. The window shattered. Glass exploded inward. Dark shapes poured through the opening. Silas grabbed his rifle, but a man was already on him, tackling him to the ground. The rifle skittered across the floor. Sarah screamed. She grabbed Rose and pushed her toward the stairs. "Run upstairs! Hide!" Rose stumbled backward, her eyes wide with terror. She saw her mother turn to face the intruders. She saw Mason Cord step through the broken window, brushing glass from his coat. "Where is it?" Mason said. "The diary. Vincent Gardner's diary. We know you have it." Sarah stood straight. "I don't know what you're talking about." Mason backhanded her across the face. Sarah fell against the table. Rose tried to scream, but no sound came out. She ran down from the stairs, throwing herself at Mason, her fists pounding against his chest. Mason shoved her away. Rose hit the wall and slid to the floor, dazed. Silas fought like a cornered animal. He threw one man off, broke another's nose with a headbutt. But there were too many. They pinned him down, drove punches into his ribs until he couldn't breathe. Mason grabbed Sarah by the hair and dragged her to the center of the room. "Last chance. The diary. Now." Sarah looked at Rose, crumpled in the corner. She looked at Silas, bleeding on the floor. She made her choice. "It's in the basement," she said. "Behind the shelves. I'll show you." Mason released her. "Get it." Sarah walked to the basement door. Mason followed her down. The two other men stayed upstairs, watching Silas and Rose. In the corner, Rose saw the diary still lying on the table where Silas had left it. The men weren't looking at her. They were focused on Silas, making sure he stayed down. Rose crawled slowly, silently toward the table. Her hand closed around the diary. She tucked it inside her dress, against her skin. From the basement, a gunshot. The men upstairs looked at each other, then rushed toward the basement door. Rose ran. She went out the back door into the night, her bare feet in the snow, the diary pressed against her heart. Behind her, the cabin exploded into violence. More gunshots, shouting, the sound of furniture breaking. Rose kept running. She ran until her lungs burned, ran until she couldn't feel her feet, ran until she collapsed behind a fallen tree, gasping, shaking, alive. She pulled out the diary and held it in the moonlight. Her mother's blood was on the cover. Sarah must have been holding it when she was shot, must have pressed it into Rose's hands in those final seconds. No. Rose stood up. She had to go back, had to make sure her mother was alive, had to find Silas. She turned toward the cabin and saw the flames. They had set the house on fire. Rose ran back, stumbling, falling, getting up again. She reached the edge of the clearing and stopped. The cabin was an inferno. Flames roared into the night sky. The heat pushed her back. And then she saw Silas. He staggered out of the smoke, coughing, his clothes singed. He was carrying something. Sarah. Silas laid Sarah in the snow. Even from a distance, Rose could see the blood, could see how still her mother was. Rose's chest tightened with a scream that had no sound. Her legs wanted to run to her mother. But three men on horses circled the cabin like wolves, Mason Cord in the lead. Silas saw them. He ran back toward the burning house, grabbed something from the porch. His rifle. He fired once. The bullet took one of the riders in the chest. The man fell. The other two spurred their horses and rode into the forest. Silas stood alone in the firelight, the rifle in his hands, his wife dead at his feet. And then he saw Rose. Their eyes met across the clearing. Rose stepped out from the trees, her dress torn, her feet bloody. The diary clutched in her hands. Silas ran to her. He dropped the rifle and fell to his knees and wrapped his arms around her. Rose could not hear his sobs, but she felt them. Felt the way his whole body shook with grief and rage, and something that might have been relief that she was alive. When he pulled back, his face was streaked with tears and soot. He looked at the diary in her hands. Then he looked back at Sarah's body, lying in the red snow. Silas picked up Rose and carried her away from the burning cabin, away from the dead, away from everything they had known. They walked for an hour in silence. Rose clung to him, her face buried in his shoulder, her body racked with silent weeping. Finally, Silas set her down in a small cave sheltered from the wind. He built a fire. Neither of them spoke. What was there to say? When the fire was burning steady, Silas sat down and opened his hands, palms up, an invitation. Rose placed the diary in his hands. Silas opened it to the first page. He read for a long time. Then he looked at Rose with something like horror in his eyes. He took out a piece of paper and a pencil from his pack. He wrote, "Do you know what this is?" Rose nodded. He wrote, "Your mother died for this." Rose nodded again. Tears streamed down her face. Silas wrote, "The men who did this work for Judge Ephraim Harlow. He owns Copper Bluff, owns the law, owns everything." Rose took the pencil. She wrote in large, angry letters, "Then we take it from him." Silas shook his head. He wrote, "You don't understand. Harlow is too powerful, too protected." Rose grabbed the pencil back. "Mother died. Father died. They died for the truth. What good is truth if we hide it?" Silas stared at her words. Then he closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he looked different. Older, or perhaps younger. Perhaps for the first time in 5 years, he looked like the man he used to be. He wrote, "There is something you need to know about me. Something I am ashamed of." Rose waited. Silas took a deep breath and began to write. 5 years ago, I was a deputy in Copper Bluff. There was an accident at the mine. 12 men died. I was sent to investigate. I found evidence that it wasn't an accident, found traces of explosives, found inconsistencies in the reports. I went to Judge Harlow with what I'd discovered. He paused, his hand shaking, then continued. Harlow offered me money, $500 to leave town and forget what I'd seen. I refused, so he threatened me, said he knew where my mother lived. Said accidents could happen to her, too. I was afraid. I took the money. I left. I've been running ever since. Rose read the words. She looked at Silas, her stepfather, this man who had married her mother, who had lived in their home for 3 years, who had always seemed so distant, so closed off. Now she understood why. She took the pencil. She wrote, "One of the men who died was my father, Vincent Gardner." Silas's face went pale. "What?" Rose nodded. She flipped through the diary to an entry near the beginning. She pointed to a line. Silas read it aloud in a whisper. March 20th, 1885. I witnessed the explosion today. 12 dead. Judge Harlow arrived within the hour and ordered the investigation closed. I tried to object but was overruled. Among the dead, Thomas Klein, Robert Sutter, James McCreary, Patrick Dunn, William Garrett, Daniel Hess, Marcus Flynn, Joseph Greer, Samuel Birch, Henry Ward, Paul Kincaid, and my brother-in-law, Edward Carson, all good men, all murdered for seeing too much. Silas looked up at Rose. Vincent wrote this. Rose pointed to the signature at the end of the entry. Vincent Gardner, March 21st, 1885. But this says Edward Carson was his brother-in-law, Silas said. Not that Vincent himself died. Rose took the diary and flipped to a page near the end. She showed him an entry dated April 2nd, 1885. They came for me tonight. I barely escaped. Sarah doesn't know how close it was. I am writing this as my final entry. If I die, someone must know the truth. The real mine records are hidden. I have buried them in my father's grave at Elk Crossing Cemetery plot C14. The combination to open the sealed box is Sarah's birthday. Tell her I love her. Tell Rose I am sorry I couldn't protect her better. Tell them both that some truths are worth dying for. Vincent Gardner. Below that, in different handwriting, a single line. Vincent was found dead 2 days after this entry. Official cause accidental fall, Sarah Gardner widow. Silas closed the diary. He sat in silence for a long time. Then he looked at Rose, really looked at her. This girl who had lost 2 fathers. This girl who had watched her mother die tonight. This girl who could not speak, but whose eyes spoke volumes. He wrote on the paper, I failed your father. I could have saved him if I had been brave. I wasn't. I ran. I've been running ever since. Rose read it. Then she wrote back, you can't run anymore. No. Will you fight? Silas looked at the diary, looked at the names of the dead, looked at this girl who had somehow survived the night. He wrote, yes, I will fight. I will get the real records from your grandfather's grave. I will bring down Harlow, even if it kills me. Rose shook her head violently. She grabbed the pencil and wrote in fierce, determined strokes, not alone, together. We fight together. Mother died for this. Father died for this. I won't let their deaths mean nothing. And I won't let you die too. Silas felt something crack open in his chest. For 3 years he had kept this girl at arm's length. For 3 years he had been a stranger living in her house. But now, sitting in this cave with the fire burning between them and death hunting them in the dark, he saw her clearly for the first time. Not his stepdaughter, his daughter. He reached out and took her hand. Rose squeezed back. They sat like that for a long time, holding on to each other, two survivors in the wilderness, bound together by blood and grief, and a promise they would keep or die trying. Outside, the snow continued to fall. Somewhere in the darkness, Mason Cord was riding back to his master to report that the woman was dead, but the girl had escaped. Somewhere in Copper Bluff, Judge Ephraim Harlow was sleeping in his mansion, dreaming of gold and power, unaware that a reckoning was coming. And in the cave, Silas Thorne made a decision that would change everything. He would not run anymore. He would stand. He would fight. And he would teach this silent girl that sometimes the most powerful voice in the world is the one that speaks through action instead of words. Dawn was still hours away when Silas wrote one final message to Rose. Tomorrow we ride to Elk Crossing. We find Caleb Ross, the deputy, there. He was your father's friend. We can trust him. We'll need help. We'll need allies. Because in 6 days there will be a trial, and Judge Harlow will be the one on trial whether he knows it or not. Rose read it and nodded. Then she wrote, "What if we fail?" Silas looked at her. He thought about all the years he had run from the truth, all the nights he had lain awake haunted by the faces of men he could have saved. He wrote, "Then we fail standing up, together." Rose managed a small smile, her first smile since her mother died. She lay down by the fire, exhausted beyond measure. Silas covered her with his coat and watched the rifle across his knees, the diary tucked inside his shirt next to his heart. In the firelight he looked at the girl sleeping. He had married her mother out of loneliness and fear. But this girl, this fierce, silent girl, who had run through fire and blood to protect a truth that most people would have buried, this girl he would die for. Not because she was his stepdaughter, because she was his daughter in every way that mattered. The fire burned low, the stars wheeled overhead, and somewhere in the mountains a reckoning began to take shape. One that would shake the foundations of power, one that would give voice to the voiceless, one that would prove that some silences speak louder than any scream. Morning came slowly to the mountains. Silas woke to find Rose already awake, sitting at the mouth of the cave, staring out at the white wilderness. The diary lay open in her lap. She had been reading it by the pale light of dawn. She turned when she sensed his movement. Her eyes were red but dry. She had cried herself empty during the night. Silas knelt beside her. He took out paper and pencil and wrote, "We need to move. Harlow's men will be searching." Rose's response was a nod, then a finger jab toward a passage in the diary. No words needed. Silas read it. August 3rd, 1885. Met with Caleb Ross today. He is a good man, perhaps the only lawman in this territory not bought by Harlow. He works in Elk Crossing outside Harlow's direct control. I told him some of what I know. He believed me, said if anything happens to me, I should make sure Sarah knows she can trust him. Caleb loves her still, I think, but he is honorable. He would never act on it. That kind of decency is rare. If I die and Sarah needs help, she should go to Caleb. Deputy Caleb Ross, Elk Crossing. Silas looked at Rose. Your father trusted this man. Rose wrote, Do you? I don't know him, but I know your father was a good judge of character. Rose wrote, Then we go to Elk Crossing. They gathered what little they had, the diary, the clothes on their backs, Silas's rifle. They left the cave as the sun broke over the eastern peaks, turning the snow to gold. The ride to Elk Crossing would take 2 days. 2 days of keeping to the forest, avoiding roads, watching always for riders. Harlow would have men everywhere by now. Mason Cord would have reported back. The hunt was on. They walked for hours in silence. Rose rode behind Silas on the horse, her arms wrapped around his waist, her face pressed against his back. She could feel the steady rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of his body against the cold. By midday they reached a frozen stream. Silas stopped to let the horse drink. Rose climbed down and stretched her legs. She walked to the water's edge and knelt, scooping the icy liquid to her face. When she looked up, Silas was standing a few feet away, watching her with an expression she could not quite read. He knelt and wrote in the snow with a stick, "I'm sorry about your mother." Rose looked at the words. Then she took the stick and wrote beneath them, "I'm sorry you lost your wife." They looked at each other. Two people bound by tragedy. Two people who had lived under the same roof for 3 years as strangers. Silas wrote, "Sarah was a good woman." Rose wrote, "Did you love her?" The question hung in the frozen air. Silas stared at it for a long time. Then he wrote slowly, carefully, "I respected her, I cared for her, but love, I don't know. We married for practical reasons. She needed protection. I needed purpose. Maybe love would have come with time." Rose wrote, "She loved you. At the end she said your name." Silas closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet. Rose reached out and took his hand. Her grip was strong, insistent. They sat like that by the frozen stream, holding hands, sharing grief in a silence that needed no words. After a while, Silas stood. They had to keep moving. As they rode through the afternoon, the sky grew heavy with the promise of more snow. They found shelter in an abandoned trapper's cabin just as the first flakes began to fall. The cabin was small, one room, the roof partially collapsed. But there was a stone fireplace, and enough dry wood stacked in the corner to last the night. Silas built a fire. Rose sat against the wall, the diary open in her lap again. She had been reading it throughout the day, absorbing her father's words, learning the shape of the man she barely remembered. Vincent Gardner had died when Rose was 13. She had memories of him, a gentle man with calloused hands, a man who sang while he worked, a man who had learned simple signs to communicate with her, who had never made her feel broken or less than whole. But she had been young, and after his death, Sarah had been reluctant to talk about him. The grief too fresh, the wound too deep. Now, reading his diary, Rose felt like she was meeting her father for the first time. Silas watched her from across the fire. He could see the concentration on her face, the way her lips moved slightly as she read forming words she could not speak. He took out paper and wrote, "What does it say?" Rose looked up. She turned the diary around so he could see. It was an entry from early in Vincent's marriage to Sarah. Silas read it aloud, his voice quiet in the crackling warmth. June 10th, 1878. Sarah agreed to marry me today. I am the happiest man alive, but she has one condition. I must accept Rose as my daughter. Rose, the child she found 3 years ago, abandoned at the church steps in Cheyenne. A baby left in a basket with a note that said, "Only her name is Rose. Please love her." Sarah took the child in, raised her as her own. The girl is deaf and mute-born that way, the doctor says. Sarah loves her with a fierceness I have rarely seen. When I proposed, Sarah looked me in the eye and said, "Rose is my daughter. If you cannot love her as yours, then I cannot be your wife." I did not hesitate. I said yes, not because I had to, because I wanted to, because any woman who could love an abandoned child so completely is a woman worth spending a life with. And Rose, she is already my daughter in my heart. Biology means nothing. Love means everything. Silas finished reading. He looked at Rose. She was staring at him, her face pale, her eyes wide with shock. She grabbed the diary and read the passage again, and again. Her hands began to shake. She stood abruptly and walked to the far corner of the cabin. Her shoulders heaved. She was crying, the silent sobs racking her body. Silas went to her. He placed a hand on her shoulder. She spun around and pushed him away, not violently, but firmly. She needed space, needed air, needed to breathe. She pulled out her notebook and wrote with shaking hands, "I'm not her daughter. I'm not anyone's daughter. I'm just some foundling, some unwanted thing left in a basket." Silas took the notebook gently. He read her words. Then he wrote beneath them, "You are Sarah's daughter. You are Vincent's daughter. Blood doesn't make family. Choice does." Rose shook her head. She wrote, "They chose me because they pitied me." Silas wrote, "They chose you because they loved you. Read the entry again." Vincent didn't have to say yes. He wanted to. And Sarah. She could have left you at that church. She could have given you to an orphanage. But she took you home. She raised you. She died protecting you. That's not pity. That's love." Rose read his words. The tears continued to fall, but something in her face began to soften. She wrote, "Who am I? Where did I come from?" Silas wrote, "I don't know, but I know who you are now. You are Rose Thorne. You are the bravest person I have ever met. You are the daughter of two people who loved you enough to die for you, and you are my daughter now, if you'll have me." Rose looked at those last words for a long time. Then she threw her arms around Silas and buried her face in his chest. He held her while she cried, held her while the fire burned low and the snow fell outside, held her like he should have held her 3 years ago when he first became her stepfather, but kept himself distant out of fear and awkwardness and the belief that he could never replace her real father. Now he understood. He was not replacing anyone. He was simply choosing to be present, to stay, to love. When Rose finally pulled away, her eyes were swollen but clear. She picked up the notebook and wrote, "Thank you." Silas wrote, "For what?" "For not leaving me." "I'll never leave you." "That's a promise." Rose managed a small smile. She wrote, "Mother chose well when she married you." Silas felt his throat tighten. He wrote, "I wish I had been better to her. I wish I had shown her more, told her more. She knew. I could see it in the way she looked at you." They sat together by the fire as night fell. Rose eventually fell asleep, her head resting on Silas's shoulder. He stayed awake, keeping watch, the rifle across his knees. At some point in the deep hours of the night, he took out his own piece of paper and wrote a letter he would never send. "Sarah, I don't know if you can hear me wherever you are. I don't know if such things are possible. But I need to say this. I'm sorry I wasn't there when you needed me. Sorry I didn't see the danger coming. Sorry for every moment I held back when I should have stepped forward. You deserve better than me, but you gave me something precious. You gave me a daughter. And I swear to you on everything I am or ever will be, I will protect her. I will fight for her. I will not fail her the way I failed you. Rest easy, Sarah. Rose is safe with me." He folded the paper and tucked it into his shirt pocket close to his heart. Outside, the snow continued its silent fall. They reached the outskirts of Elk Crossing late the following day. It was a small town, perhaps 300 souls, built along a creek that fed down from the mountains. The main street held a general store, a church, a saloon, a livery, and the sheriff's office. Silas and Rose did not enter through the main street. They came in from the north along the creek, staying in the cover of the cottonwood trees. Caleb Ross lived in a small house behind the sheriff's office. Silas knew this because Vincent's diary had mentioned it. A bachelor's house, simple and spare. They waited until full dark. Then Silas approached the back door and knocked 3 quick raps. Movement inside. The door opened a crack. A man's face appeared younger than Silas expected, perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair and suspicious eyes. "Who are you?" the man said. "Silas Thorne. I need to speak with Deputy Caleb Ross." "I'm Ross. What do you want?" "I'm here about Vincent Gardner." Caleb's expression changed. He opened the door wider. "Vincent's been dead 4 years. I know. I married his widow, Sarah Gardner Thorne." Caleb's face went pale. "Sarah, is she with you?" "No, she's dead. Killed 3 nights ago by men working for Judge Harlow." Caleb gripped the doorframe. For a moment he looked like he might collapse. Then he steadied himself. "Come in, quickly." Silas gestured, and Rose emerged from the shadows. Caleb looked at her with recognition and pain. "Rose, my God, you've grown. I haven't seen you since the funeral." Rose nodded, but said nothing, could say nothing. They went inside. Caleb's house was neat and orderly, the home of a man who lived alone and kept busy to avoid thinking too much. Caleb poured coffee for Silas and himself. He gave Rose a cup of water. They sat at the small table. "Tell me everything," Caleb said. Silas told him. The men at the door, the invasion of the cabin, Sarah's death, the fire, the diary, the escape through the forest. Rose listened, watching their lips move, catching pieces of the story. When Silas finished, Caleb sat in silence for a long time. Then he said, "Sarah came to me once, about a year after Vincent died. She asked if I would help her if she ever needed it. I said yes. I asked what kind of help. She wouldn't say. Just said that someday she might need someone she could trust. I told her I would always be that person." He looked at Rose. "I loved your mother. I asked her to marry me 3 times over 10 years. She refused every time, said I was too good for her, said she didn't want to drag me into her complicated life. Then she married Vincent, a man who worked in a mine who had nothing but his courage and his decency. I was jealous, angry even, but I went to their wedding. I wished them well, because I loved her enough to want her happy, even if it wasn't with me." Caleb's voice cracked. He cleared his throat. "When Vincent died, I thought maybe I'd have another chance, but then she married you, a stranger. I couldn't understand it, but now I do. She needed someone who could protect Rose, not someone who loved her, someone who could fight." Silas said quietly, "I failed at that." "You're both alive. That's not failure." Silas placed the diary on the table. "Vincent wrote that you could be trusted. We need your help." Caleb opened the diary. He read several entries, his face growing darker with each page. Finally he closed it and pushed it back across the table. "This is enough to hang Harlow, but getting it into the right hands. That's the problem. The sheriff here is honest, but he's old and cautious. He won't move against Harlow without ironclad proof, and the territorial marshal is in Helena, 200 miles away. By the time we get word to him, Harlow will have destroyed every scrap of evidence and killed everyone involved." Silas said, "Vincent wrote that the real mine records are hidden in his father's grave, Elk Crossing Cemetery, plot C14. Caleb's eyes widened. "You're saying we dig up old Gardner's grave?" "That's exactly what I'm saying. Vincent hid physical documents, actual proof of the theft and the murders. With those records and this diary, we have enough to force the marshal's hand." "And when do you propose we do this grave robbing?" "Tonight." Caleb laughed a bitter sound. "You don't waste time." "We don't have time. Every hour we wait, Harlow gets closer to finding us." Rose had been writing in her notebook throughout the conversation. She pushed it toward Caleb. The words were simple. "My father trusted you. My mother trusted you. I trust you. Will you help us?" Caleb looked at the girl watching him with eyes that had witnessed her mother's murder, eyes that demanded truth, not platitudes. "Yes," he said, "I'll help you." The cemetery sat on a hill overlooking the town. Old cottonwoods grew between the graves, their bare branches reaching toward a sky full of stars. They came at midnight. Silas, Rose, and Caleb. They brought shovels, and a lantern shuddered to show only a sliver of light. Plot C14 was near the back beneath a simple stone marker. Edward Gardner, 1821 to 1882, beloved father. They began to dig. The ground was half frozen, the work brutal. Silas and Caleb took turns with the shovels, while Rose kept watch, her eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. An hour passed. 2. The hole grew deeper. Finally the shovel struck wood, the coffin. They cleared the dirt away and pried open the lid. Edward Gardner had been dead for 7 years. What remained was bones and rotted cloth. Caleb held the lantern close. There, clutched in the skeletal hands, was a small tin box. Silas reached in and lifted it free. The box was sealed with wax. He broke the seal and opened it. Inside, a stack of papers, ledgers, mine reports, all in Vincent Gardner's meticulous handwriting. Dates, amounts, names. A complete record of Judge Ephraim Harlow's crimes. "We have him," Caleb whispered. "This is everything." Silas closed the box. He was about to speak when light exploded around them. Lanterns, dozens of them, surrounding the cemetery. Men stepped out of the shadows, 10 of them, maybe more, all armed. And at the front, Mason Cord. His shoulder was bandaged where Silas had shot him, but his gun hand was steady. "Good evening, gentlemen," Mason said. "Thank you for doing the digging for us. Saved us considerable effort." Silas moved to stand in front of Rose. Caleb raised his hands slowly, carefully. Mason walked forward, his boots crunching on the disturbed earth. "I'll take that box now." "How did you know?" Silas said. "Judge Harlow is a very intelligent man. He's known about Vincent's hiding place for years. He just never dug it up himself. Too conspicuous. Much better to wait for someone else to do it, someone desperate enough to come in the night. We've been watching this cemetery every night for 3 days, waiting for you to show up." Caleb said, "You can't do this, Cord. I'm a deputy. This is theft of evidence." Mason laughed. "Evidence of what, a dead man's scribblings in a box hidden in a grave? That's not evidence. That's grave robbing. And you, Deputy Ross, are under arrest for desecrating a burial site." He gestured, and two men grabbed Caleb, forcing him to his knees. Silas held the tin box against his chest. "You'll have to shoot me for it." "That can be arranged." A gun cocked behind them. Then another. They were surrounded, outnumbered, outgunned. Rose stood frozen, her eyes moving from face to face, reading the violence in their expressions. Mason held out his hand. "The box, last chance." Silas looked at Rose. She was watching him, her face pale in the lantern light. He could see the fear in her eyes, but beneath the fear something else. Trust. She trusted him to make the right choice. Silas made it. He handed Mason the box. Mason opened it, glanced at the contents, smiled. "Perfect. Judge Harlow will be very pleased." He closed the box and tucked it under his arm. Then he drew his pistol and aimed it at Silas's chest. "Now let's clean up some loose ends." The gunshot came from the edge of the cemetery, but it was not Mason who fired. One of Harlow's men dropped a hole in his chest. Everyone spun toward the sound. An old man stepped out of the darkness. He was perhaps 60, white-haired, wearing a sheriff's badge. He held a rifle, and his hands were steady as stone. "Clayton Wade," the old man said, "Sheriff of Elk Crossing, and I'm placing all of you under arrest for trespassing, grave desecration, and attempted murder." Behind him, 5 more men appeared, deputies, all armed. Mason's face twisted with rage. "Sheriff Wade, you're making a mistake. Judge Harlow won't forget this." "I've been remembering things Judge Harlow wants me to forget for 20 years, Wade said. "I'm done. Deputy Ross, you all right?" Caleb stood rubbing his wrists where the men had held him. "I'm fine, Sheriff." "Good. Now, gentlemen, I suggest you all drop your weapons, nice and slow." Mason looked around. His men were outnumbered now. Some were already lowering their guns. "This isn't over," Mason said. "No," Wade agreed. "It's not, but it's a start." Mason dropped his gun. One by one, his men did the same. Wade's deputies moved in, collecting weapons, binding hands. Wade walked over to Mason and plucked the tin box from under his arm. "I'll be taking this. Evidence in a murder investigation." He turned to Silas. "You must be Thorne. Caleb sent word you might be coming. Asked me to keep an eye on the cemetery." Silas looked at Caleb, who shrugged. "I didn't tell you because I wasn't sure he'd help. Sheriff Wade has been under Harlow's thumb for a long time." Wade's face was grim. "That's true, and I'm ashamed of it. 20 years I looked the other way. 20 years I told myself I had no choice. My daughter died 10 years back. Car accident, they said. But I always wondered, always suspected Harlow had a hand in it. She was asking questions, you see, about the mine, about the accidents. Then one day her buggy went off a cliff. Freak accident. And I had a granddaughter to think about, a little girl named Lily. So I kept my mouth shut, did what I was told, became the kind of lawman I swore I'd never be." He looked at Rose, standing silent in the midst of all this violence. "Then Deputy Ross told me about you. A girl who watched her mother die. A girl who can't speak but who's fighting anyway. And I thought about my Lily. Thought about what kind of world I'm leaving her. A world where men like Harlow can kill with impunity, or a world where someone finally stands up and says enough." Wade handed the tin box to Silas. "This is yours, or rather it belongs to the truth. Use it well." Silas took the box. "Thank you, Sheriff." "Don't thank me yet. Harlow's not beaten. He's still a judge. He still has power. What we need is a public reckoning, a trial." "How do we try a judge?" Wade smiled grimly. "In 5 days, there's a quarterly trial session, public proceedings. Harlow presides, the whole town attends. It's a spectacle. Harlow likes to remind people who's in charge. But if we can present evidence in open court in front of 200 witnesses, he can't just make it disappear. He'll have to answer for it." Caleb said, "You're suggesting we ambush him during his own trial. I'm suggesting we give him enough rope to hang himself." Silas looked at the tin box in his hands. Then at Rose. Then at the 2 lawmen who were risking everything to help them. "All right," he said. 5 days. We prepare. We gather witnesses, and we bring Judge Harlow down." Wade nodded. "You'll stay at my house. Both of you. It's safer than the hotel. And Rose, my granddaughter Lily is about your age. She'll be glad for the company." Rose wrote in her notebook, "Thank you, Sheriff Wade." Wade read it, and his eyes softened. "You're welcome, child. Your father was a good man. Vincent Gardner. I should have helped him when he was alive. I can't change that. But I can help you now." They left the cemetery as the first light of dawn touched the eastern sky. Behind them, Mason Cord and his men were marched toward the jail. Ahead, the town of Elk Crossing lay quiet and peaceful, unaware that a war was about to begin. Over the next 3 days, they prepared. Sheriff Wade sent word to the families of the men who had died in the mine, quietly, carefully. One by one, they came to his house, widows and children and aging parents who had lived with suspicion and grief for years. Martha Klein came. Her husband Thomas had died in the 1885 collapse. She was a woman in her 50s, strong, backed with eyes like flint. Jonas Pritchett came. He had worked in the mine for 15 years, had survived the collapse because he was sick that day. He knew what Harlow had done. He had kept silent out of fear. Now, with his wife dead from illness and his children grown and gone, he had nothing left to lose. Reverend Thomas Elway came. He had buried 47 men over the years, all called accidents, all lies. He brought his burial records, meticulous notes on every death. One by one they read the diary. One by one they looked at the mine records from the tin box. One by one their suspicions were confirmed. And one by one they agreed to testify. Rose watched them come and go. She sat in the corner of Sheriff Wade's parlor sketching in a notebook Wade had given her. She drew their faces, drew their hands, worn by work and grief, drew the way they looked when they realized that the truth they had suspected for years was real, was documented, was provable. At night, Rose stayed in a room with Lily Wade, the sheriff's granddaughter. Lily was 12 years old, bright-eyed and curious. She had never met someone who could not speak before. At first she was shy, uncertain how to communicate, but Rose showed her, wrote her notes, drew pictures, and slowly, carefully, the two girls found a language. One night Lily wrote, "Are you scared?" Rose's pencil moved quickly. Yes, but more angry than scared. Lily's next question, "What will you do at the trial?" Rose's answer, "Tell the truth, somehow." Lily hesitated, then wrote what they both knew, "But you can't talk." Rose smiled, drew a picture instead of writing herself standing in a courtroom holding up a drawing. Beneath it, one word, "C." Lily understood. Lily did not understand, but she would, soon. During the days, Silas met with Wade and Caleb planning the strategy. The quarterly trial was a public event. Harlow presided over minor cases, theft, drunkenness, disputes over property. The whole town attended. It was theater as much as justice. The plan was simple. Midway through the proceedings, Silas would stand and formally accuse Harlow of murder and theft in front of everyone. Harlow could not refuse to respond, not with 200 witnesses watching. Then the evidence would be presented, the diary, the mine records, the testimony of the families. "What if he orders us arrested?" Caleb asked. "He will," Wade said. "But I'll refuse the order, and with enough witnesses, with enough public pressure, Harlow won't be able to simply make us disappear. He'll have to answer the charges. And if he runs, we'll be ready for that too." Silas looked at the old sheriff. "You're putting your granddaughter at risk. Harlow will retaliate." Wade's face was stone. "My granddaughter deserves a world where men like Harlow face justice. I've failed her by staying silent this long. I won't fail her anymore." On the 4th day, everything changed. Silas woke to find Wade at his door, his face ashen. "She's gone," Wade said. "Who's gone?" "Lily, my granddaughter. I went to wake her this morning. Her bed was empty, window open, tracks in the snow leading away." Rose appeared in the hallway, her face alarmed. She had seen Lily last night, sleeping peacefully. Wade held out a note. It had been left on Lily's pillow. Silas read it aloud. "Sheriff Wade, your granddaughter is safe with me. For now, if you want to see her alive again, bring me the diary and the mine records. Tonight, midnight, the old sawmill outside town. Come alone. If I see any deputies, any witnesses, anyone other than you, the girl dies. And this time it won't look like an accident. Judge E. Harlow." Silas handed the note back. Wade's hand shook as he held it. "I have to give him what he wants," Wade said. "I can't let Lily die. If you give him the evidence, he wins. Everyone who testified, everyone who stood up, they'll be next. Harlow will kill them all to cover his tracks. I don't care. She's my granddaughter. She's all I have left in this world." Caleb came into the room. He had heard everything. "There has to be another way." "There isn't," Wade said. Not if I want Lily back alive. Rose had been listening, watching their lips following the crisis unfolding. She took her notebook and wrote quickly. She showed it to Silas. He read it and shook his head. No, absolutely not. Rose underlined what she had written harder, more insistent. Silas read it aloud for the others. We don't need the records. We have witnesses. We have the diary. Most importantly, we have the truth. Give Harlow the tin box. Save Lily. We go to the trial anyway. Wade stared at her. Without the mine records, we have no hard proof. Just testimony and Vincent's diary. Harlow can claim it's all lies. Rose wrote 15 families, Reverend Elway's burial records, Jonas Pritchett, who worked in the mine, Deputy Ross, who investigated, you, Sheriff Wade, who kept silent for 20 years but won't anymore. All of you testifying in public. That's not nothing. That's everything. Caleb said slowly. She's right. The power of the records isn't in the papers themselves. It's in the fact that 15 families have been waiting years for someone to believe them. If they all stand up in that courtroom and tell their stories, Harlow can't shoot them all, not in front of the whole town. Wade looked at Rose, this silent girl who had lost everything and was still fighting. You're very brave, child. Rose wrote, I'm very angry. There's a difference. Despite everything, Wade almost smiled. Silas said, if we do this, we're gambling everything on the trial. If it fails, Harlow walks free and we have no evidence left to use against him. Then we make sure it doesn't fail, Caleb said. Wade took a long breath. All right. I'll take the tin box to Harlow tonight. Get Lily back. But I'm also sending word to the territorial marshal in Helena. I'm telling him what's happening. Even if the trial fails, there will be an official investigation. How will you get word to Helena before tomorrow's trial? Telegraph. I'll send it from the next town over. Harlow doesn't control everything outside Copper Bluff. The day passed in tense preparation. Wade left at dusk to ride to the neighboring town and send his message. Caleb continued gathering witnesses, making sure they would all be at the trial. Silas and Rose sat together in Wade's parlor as night fell. Silas wrote, Are you sure about this? We're giving up our strongest evidence. Rose wrote back, The strongest evidence is people willing to tell the truth. Paper can burn. People's voices can't. But you have no voice, Rose smiled. She wrote, I don't need one, not anymore. Silas did not understand what she meant, but he trusted her. That night, Sheriff Wade rode to the old sawmill. He went alone as instructed. He brought the tin box. Judge Ephraim Harlow was waiting, surrounded by men with guns. Mason Cord stood at his right hand, his wounded shoulder now bandaged properly. Wade held up the box. Let me see my granddaughter first. Harlow gestured. 2 men brought Lily forward. She was unharmed, but terrified. When she saw her grandfather, she ran to him. Wade held her briefly, then pushed her behind him. He handed the tin box to Harlow. Harlow opened it, examined the contents, smiled. Good. You made the right choice, Sheriff. Where's Harlow's other evidence? Mason asked. The diary, Wade said. This was all there was in the grave. It was a lie, but Harlow did not know that. No matter, Harlow said. Without the records, they have nothing, just hearsay and accusations. Not enough. He looked at Wade. You've been a loyal servant for 20 years, Clayton. I'd hate to have to kill you now, so here's what will happen. Tomorrow's trial proceeds as normal. You keep your mouth shut. Your deputies keep their mouths shut. No one mentions mines or accidents or any of this unpleasantness. In return, your granddaughter stays safe. Understood. Wade's jaw clenched, but he nodded. Good man. Now go home, and sleep well knowing you made the right choice for your family. Wade took Lily's hand and walked back to his horse. He did not look back. Behind him, Harlow's laughter echoed through the night, but Harlow did not know what was coming. Did not know that while he celebrated his victory, copies of the mine records had already been made. Did not know that Deputy Ross had sent them to Helena days ago by separate courier. Did not know that tomorrow, in his own courtroom in front of his own people, the reckoning would begin. Wade returned home near midnight. He found Silas, Rose, and Caleb waiting. Lily ran to Rose and hugged her. Rose held the younger girl, smoothing her hair. Wade looked at Silas. It's done. He has the records. He thinks we're beaten. Good. Let him think that. Tomorrow he'll learn different. They sat together in the parlor, these unlikely allies. A disgraced lawman finding his courage, a young deputy who had loved a woman from afar, a stepfather learning what it meant to be a real father, and a girl without a voice preparing to speak louder than anyone had ever spoken before. Rose took out her sketchbook. She had been working on something for days. Now she showed it to the others. It was a series of drawings, detailed, meticulous, powerful. The first drawing showed Mason Cord shooting Sarah Thorne, every detail of his face captured perfectly down to the scar on his cheek. The second showed Silas 5 years ago being threatened by Harlow. Rose had drawn this from Silas's description, but it looked like a photograph. The third showed 47 graves, each one labeled with a name, the men who had died in Harlow's mines. The fourth showed Judge Harlow himself, standing over a pile of bodies, gold coins spilling from his hands. And the fifth showed Rose herself, a girl without a voice standing in a courtroom holding a pen like a sword. Beneath it she had written in careful letters, "The voiceless can still tell the truth." Caleb stared at the drawings. "You made these?" Rose nodded. "They're remarkable. Evidence doesn't have to be words or documents. These drawings are testimony, visual testimony." Wade said quietly, "Tomorrow is going to be the most important day of all our lives." Silas looked at Rose. "Are you ready?" She wrote, "I've been ready since the moment Mother died." They slept fitfully that night, if they slept at all, and when morning came they prepared for war. Not a war of guns and blood, though that might come. A war of truth against lies. A war where the weapon would be courage and the battlefield would be a courtroom. A war where a girl who could not speak would find a way to make the whole world listen. The trial was set for 10 o'clock. At 9:30 the people of Elk Crossing began filing into the courthouse. It was a large building, the grandest in town, with high ceilings and rows of benches. Judge Ephraim Harlow sat on the bench resplendent in his black robes. He looked every inch the respectable jurist. White beard neatly trimmed, eyes sharp and intelligent, the very picture of justice. He watched the townspeople file in, saw the familiar faces, saw Sheriff Wade enter with his deputies, saw the families of the dead miners scattered throughout the crowd. He saw Silas Thorne and the Gardner girl enter last, taking seats in the back row. Harlow's eyes narrowed, but he showed no alarm. Without the mine records, what could they possibly do? Make accusations? He would deny them, call them liars and troublemakers, have them arrested for disrupting court proceedings. He had won. The girl and her stepfather just didn't know it yet. At precisely 10 o'clock, Harlow gavelled the court to order. "Good morning, citizens of Elk Crossing. We gather today for our quarterly trial session. Let justice be served." The first case was called. A man accused of stealing a horse. Simple, quick. Harlow listened to the evidence, rendered judgment. 30 days in jail. The second case. A woman accused of running a disorderly house. Harlow was lenient. A fine. A warning. The third case. 2 men fighting over water rights. The morning proceeded normally. Harlow was in his element, dispensing wisdom and law in equal measure. At 11:30 he asked, "Are there any other matters before this court?" Silas Thorne stood. "Yes, Your Honor. I have a matter." Every head in the courtroom turned. Harlow looked at Silas with cold calculation. "State your business, sir." "My name is Silas Thorne. I am here to accuse you, Judge Ephraim Harlow, of murder, theft, corruption, and conspiracy." The courtroom erupted. Gasps. Shouts. Harlow's gavel came down like thunder. "Order, order in this court." The noise subsided. Harlow's face was calm, but his eyes blazed. "Mr. Thorne, you are making a very serious accusation, one that borders on contempt of court. I'm making an accusation supported by evidence, witnesses, and testimony, and I'm making it in front of 200 citizens who have a right to hear the truth." "Then present your evidence." Silas held up Vincent Gardner's diary. "This is the diary of Vincent Gardner, miner husband, father. In it he documented 12 years of theft, murder, and conspiracy, all orchestrated by you." Harlow leaned back. "A diary. That's your evidence, the private writings of a dead man, combined with this." Silas gestured, and Caleb Ross stood holding up a folder. "Burial records from Reverend Elway. 47 deaths over 12 years, all ruled accidents, all suspiciously similar." Reverend Elway stood. I can testify to every death, Your Honor, every burial, every family left behind. Harlow's expression did not change. Tragic accidents in a dangerous profession. This proves nothing. Martha Klein stood. My husband was one of those accidents, Judge Harlow. Thomas Klein. Died in 1885. You told me it was a support beam collapse. But my Thomas wrote me a letter the day before he died, said he'd seen something in the mine, something that frightened him, said men were disappearing, said the gold yields didn't match the official reports. The next day he was dead. Another voice. My son James McCreary, dead in 1886. Another. My brother Patrick Dunn, dead in 1884. One by one the families stood, 15 of them, 15 voices. Harlow watched with growing alarm, but he kept his composure. Grief makes people see patterns where none exist. I sympathize with your losses, but sympathy is not evidence. Jonas Pritchett stood. I worked in that mine for 15 years. I saw you order shafts blown, saw you destroy records, saw you pay men to keep quiet. I was one of those men. You gave me $500 after the '85 collapse. Told me to forget what I'd seen. I took the money because I was a coward, but I'm not a coward anymore. Harlow's facade began to crack. You're a liar and a drunk, Pritchett. Everyone knows it. Maybe I am, but I'm a liar who's telling the truth for once. Caleb Ross stood. I investigated some of these deaths, found inconsistencies, tried to report them, was told by my superiors to drop it, told that Judge Harlow's word was final. Harlow pointed at Caleb. You're a disgraced deputy with an axe to grind. No, Your Honor, I'm a deputy who should have spoken up years ago. Sheriff Wade stood. The courtroom fell silent. This was the man who had served Harlow for 20 years. Ephraim, Wade said quietly, I've kept your secrets for 2 decades. Looked the other way while good men died. Told myself I had no choice. But I did have a choice. And I made the wrong one. Every day for 20 years, I made the wrong one. That stops today. Harlow's face went pale. Clayton, don't do this. My daughter died 10 years ago. You told me it was an accident, but I always wondered, always suspected. You knew she was asking questions about the mine, and then she died. Convenient. I had nothing to do with that. Maybe. Maybe not. But I'm done wondering. I'm done being afraid. These people deserve justice, and I'm going to help them get it. The courtroom was completely silent now, every person watching, waiting. Harlow stood. His hands gripped the bench. This is a conspiracy, a coordinated attack by malcontents and troublemakers. I will not dignify these accusations with a response. Silas said, Then you won't mind if we present more evidence. You have no evidence, just stories and speculation. Actually, Caleb said, we sent copies of Vincent Gardner's mine records to the Territorial Marshal in Helena 4 days ago. He should be receiving them right about now, along with Sheriff Wade's full report. There will be an official investigation, Your Honor, federal, outside your control. Harlow's composure finally shattered. We did what Vincent Gardner tried to do 12 years ago. We told the truth to someone who can't be bought or intimidated. Harlow looked around the courtroom, saw the faces of people he had controlled for years now, looking at him with different eyes, saw his power crumbling. This court is adjourned, he shouted. All of you get out. No one moved. I said, get out. Still no one moved. And then Rose Gardner stood. She walked slowly down the center aisle. Every eye followed her. This girl the world had taught to be invisible. This girl the law had silenced. Until today. She reached the front of the courtroom and turned to face the crowd. From her bag, she took out her sketchbook. She held up the first drawing. Mason Cord shooting Sarah Thorne. People gasped. The detail was extraordinary. The violence captured in perfect detail. She held up the second drawing, Harlow threatening a younger Silas. She held up the third, the 47 graves. She held up the fourth. Harlow standing over bodies, gold spilling from his hands. And then she held up the fifth drawing, herself, standing in this exact courtroom, fighting with the only weapon she had, the truth. Harlow looked at the drawings and something broke in his eyes. That girl, he whispered. She can't even speak. Rose set down the drawings. She took out paper and wrote in large letters, I don't need to speak. The truth speaks for itself. She held the paper high. The courtroom erupted in applause. Harlow sank into his chair. He looked suddenly old, diminished. "I had a daughter once," he said to no one in particular. "Her name was Eleanor. She was deaf, like you. The town mocked her, called her names. She killed herself when she was 15. I've spent 30 years trying to gain enough power that no one could ever hurt someone I loved again. But Eleanor was already gone, so I just kept going, kept taking, kept consolidating power. Forgot why I even started." He looked at Rose. "You look like her, my Eleanor. Same eyes." Rose wrote, "Then honor her memory. Tell the truth." Harlow sat in silence for a long moment. Then he spoke. "Everything they've said is true. I stole the gold. I ordered the killings. I've been doing it for 12 years. At first, it was to fund my daughter's medical care, then to protect myself. Then because I could. Because I was powerful and untouchable." He looked around the courtroom. "I'm sorry, for what that's worth. I know it's not enough. I know sorry doesn't bring back the dead, but it's all I have left to give." He removed his robes and laid them on the bench. "Sheriff Wade, I'm placing myself under arrest. For murder, for theft, for betraying every oath I ever took." Wade walked forward and put Harlow in handcuffs. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as the most powerful man in the territory was led away. And in the midst of it all, Rose Gardner stood quietly, her drawings in her hands, tears streaming down her face. She had done it. Not with words, not with violence, with truth, with courage, with the kind of strength that comes from having nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Silas walked to her and put his arms around her. She buried her face in his chest and sobbed silently, her whole body shaking with relief and grief and exhaustion. The families of the dead surrounded them, touched Rose's shoulder, whispered thanks, wept together. Outside, the sun climbed higher in a clear blue sky, and in a courthouse in Wyoming, justice had been served at last. The holding cell beneath the courthouse was small and cold. Judge Ephraim Harlow sat on the narrow cot, his hands still cuffed, his head bowed. Through the barred window high on the wall, he could hear the town celebrating above him, voices raised in relief and vindication. The sound of people who had lived under fear, finally breathing free. Sheriff Wade stood outside the cell watching the broken man who had ruled this territory for 30 years. "The territorial marshal will be here in 3 days, Wade said. "You'll be transferred to Helena for formal trial. Given your confession in open court, the verdict is already decided. You'll hang Ephraim." Harlow looked up. His eyes were red but dry. "I know. Any last requests? Let me see the girl, Rose." "Just for a moment." Wade's expression hardened. "Why? Because she reminds me of my daughter. Because I want to tell her something. 5 minutes. That's all I ask." Wade considered. Then he nodded. "I'll ask. But the choice is hers." Upstairs, the courthouse had emptied. Most of the townspeople had gone to the saloon to drink and talk and process what they had witnessed. Rose sat alone on a bench in the courtroom. She was holding a small bouquet of flowers, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She had been waiting for hours, hoping that her husband would be released from prison. Rose sat alone on a bench in the courtroom, her sketchbook in her lap. She was drawing again, always drawing. This time she sketched the faces of the families, wanted to remember them, wanted to capture the moment truth had won. Silas found her there. He sat beside her and looked at her drawings. The detail was extraordinary. Each face rendered with love and precision. He took out paper and wrote, "How do you feel?" Rose set down her pencil. She wrote back, "Empty, like I've been carrying something heavy for so long that now it's gone I don't know what to do with my hands." "That's normal. You've been fighting since the night your mother died. Now the fight is over." Is it Harlow confessed? But his men are still free. Mason Court is still out there. Silas had been thinking the same thing. Mason and at least a dozen of Harlow's hired guns had scattered when the trial went wrong. They were armed, dangerous, and had nothing left to lose. "Sheriff Wade has deputies watching the roads. Caleb is organizing patrols. We'll be safe." Rose wrote, "Will we?" Before Silas could answer, Sheriff Wade approached. He looked uncomfortable. "Miss Gardner, Judge Harlow has asked to speak with you. You have every right to refuse. but he says he has something important to tell you." Rose looked at Silas. He wrote, "You don't have to do this." She thought for a moment, then wrote, "I want to hear what he has to say." They went down to the cells. Wade unlocked the outer door but kept the cell itself locked. Rose stood 6 feet from Harlow Silas beside her, his hand resting on his pistol. Harlow stood and walked to the bars. He looked at Rose with an expression that was hard to read, regret perhaps, or recognition. "Thank you for coming," he said, speaking slowly so she could read his lips, as his Eleanor had learned to do. He spoke slowly, carefully, exaggerating each word. "When I look at you, I see my daughter. She would be your age now if she had lived. She was deaf like you, mute like you. The world was cruel to her. I tried to protect her, but I failed. She took her own life when she was 15, jumped from a bridge into the river. They found her 3 days later." He paused, his voice breaking. "I went mad with grief, swore I would never be powerless again, would never let anyone hurt someone I loved. But Eleanor was already gone, so I turned that need for power into something else. Greed. Control. I convinced myself I was building something. An empire. A legacy. But really, I was just running from the pain." Rose watched his lips move, understood most of it. "Enough," Harlow continued. "Your drawings. The one you made of yourself in the courtroom. It reminded me of something Eleanor drew before she died. A picture of herself, standing on a stage singing. She could not sing, could not speak. But she dreamed of it anyway, dreamed of being heard." He reached into his pocket slowly. Wade's hand went to his gun, but Harlow pulled out only a folded piece of paper. "This is Eleanor's drawing. I've carried it for 30 years. I want you to have it." He slid it through the bars. Rose hesitated, then she picked it up, unfolded it. The drawing was old, the paper yellowed, but the image was clear. A young girl standing on a stage, her mouth open in song musical notes floating around her head. In the corner, signed in a child's handwriting, "Eleanor Harlow, age 14. Rose looked at the drawing for a long time. Then she took out her own sketchbook. She tore out the drawing she had made of herself in the courtroom, the one holding a pen like a sword. She slid it through the bars to Harlow. He took it with trembling hands, stared at it. Then he sat down heavily on the cot and wept. Rose watched him cry. Then she wrote on her pad and held it up to the bars. "Your daughter would not want you to die hating yourself. She would want you to die at peace. I forgive you for what you did, not because you deserve it, because I deserve to let go of the anger." Harlow read it. His tears fell harder. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you." Rose turned and walked away. Silas followed her up the stairs. When they were gone, Harlow sat alone in his cell, holding the drawing of a girl who had found her voice without speaking a word. And he thought for the first time in 30 years that perhaps his Eleanor would have been proud of him for finally telling the truth, even if it came too late to save anyone. Night fell over Elk Crossing. Silas and Rose stayed at Sheriff Wade's house along with Lily. The two girls sat together in the parlor, writing notes back and forth, becoming friends in the way that young people do when they recognize kindred spirits. Wade posted deputies around the house, 2 at the front, 2 at the back. Caleb Ross coordinated patrols through the town, but Wyoming was vast and dark, and angry men could move unseen through that darkness. At midnight, Mason Cord and 8 riders approached Elk Crossing from the south. They had been hiding in the hills, waiting for their moment. Now, with Harlow arrested and the town distracted by celebration, that moment had come. Not to rescue Harlow. Mason was not that loyal or that stupid. The judge was finished. But Mason had been paid well over the years, and he had hidden that money in various places. Before he fled the territory for good, he had one piece of unfinished business. The girl. Rose Gardner had destroyed everything, had brought down the empire Mason had served, had made him look like a fool. He wanted revenge, wanted to hurt her the way she had hurt him, and he knew exactly how to do it. The riders split up. 4 headed for the sheriff's house, 4 rode to the jail. At the house, the deputies on watch never saw the attack coming. Silent knives in the dark, professional, brutal. They died without making a sound. Mason and his men entered through the back door, moved through the house like shadows. Wade was in his study reviewing papers. He heard a floorboard creak and reached for his gun. Too late. Mason's pistol cracked him across the skull. The old sheriff went down hard. Upstairs, Silas woke to the sound of breaking glass. He grabbed his rifle and ran to Rose's room. Empty. The window was open. Snow blew in. On the floor, Lily lay unconscious, a bruise forming on her temple. Silas ran to the window. In the moonlight, he saw riders disappearing into the trees. One of them had a small figure slung over his saddle, Rose. Silas's blood went cold. He ran downstairs, nearly tripped over Wade's unconscious body, checked the old man's pulse, still alive. He shouted for Caleb, for anyone. Caleb came running from the street, saw Wade bleeding, saw Silas's face. "They took her," Silas said. "Mason Cord took Rose." At the jail, the other 4 riders surrounded the building. They did not enter quietly. They smashed through the front door with rifles blazing. The deputy on duty went down in the first volley. The other deputy, coming from the back room, managed to fire once before he was shot through the chest. The riders went to the cells, found Harlow. "We're getting you out," the lead rider said. But Harlow shook his head. "No, I'm staying." "Judge, they're going to hang you." "I know, and I deserve it. Go, save yourselves." "Mason sent us. He'll kill us if we come back without you." "Then tell Mason to go to hell. I'm done running." The riders looked at each other, shrugged. They had tried. They left Harlow in his cell and rode out into the night. Behind them, the jail burned. Harlow's cell was in the basement, stone and iron. The fire could not reach him, but smoke could. Harlow sat on his cot and watched the smoke begin to filter down. He thought about Eleanor, about Rose, about all the choices he had made and could not unmake, and he waited for the end. But the end did not come. Someone was coming down the stairs through the smoke. A figure in a coat face covered with a wet cloth. Deputy Caleb Ross. "Come on," Caleb shouted. "We're getting you out. Leave me. I'm not worth saving. That's not your decision. Now move." Caleb unlocked the cell, grabbed Harlow and dragged him up the stairs. They burst out of the burning building into the cold night air. Harlow collapsed on the ground, coughing. Wade was there, conscious now, holding a bandage to his head. Silas was mounting his horse. Caleb said, "Mason's riders hit the jail, tried to free him. He refused." Silas looked at Harlow with something like surprise. Harlow coughed and managed to speak. "Where's Rose?" "Mason took her." Harlow's face went white. "No, not the girl. Anyone but her." Silas leaned down from his saddle. "Do you know where he'd take her?" Harlow thought. "The old mine. Shaft 7. It's been sealed for years. Mason used to use it as a hideout, storage for stolen goods. He knows every tunnel." "How far?" 10 miles northwest, near Copper Bluff." Silas turned his horse. Wade grabbed the bridle. "Wait, you can't go alone. Mason has 8 men. "Then I'll kill 8 men." "Silas, listen to me. We'll gather a posse. Go at dawn with numbers." "By dawn she could be dead." "I'm going now." Caleb mounted his own horse. "Then you're not going alone." Wade looked at his injured head, at Lily crying on the porch at the burning jail. He was needed here, but he handed Silas extra ammunition. "Bring her back." "I will. Or I'll die trying." Harlow stood. "Take me with you." Everyone stared at him. "I know those tunnels better than anyone. I can get you in unseen. I can help you save her." Silas's hand moved to his gun. For a moment he looked like he might shoot Harlow right there. "Why would you help?" "Because she forgave me. Because she gave me something I don't deserve, a chance at redemption. And because when I look at her, I see my daughter. And I failed Eleanor. I will not fail Rose." Silas looked at Caleb. Caleb shrugged. "An extra gun, and he knows the ground. If you betray us," Silas said to Harlow, "I will put a bullet in your brain. If I betray you, I'll deserve it." They rode north into the darkness. 3 men on a mission to save 1 girl, a stepfather who had learned to love, a deputy who had loved from afar, and a fallen judge seeking one last chance at grace. The mine lay in a narrow canyon, the entrance boarded up with old timber, but there were other ways in. Harlow led them to a collapsed air shaft half a mile from the main entrance. They dismounted and climbed down into the earth. The tunnels were black as death, cold as the grave. They lit lanterns and moved single file through passages that had not seen light in years. Harlow navigated from memory. Left at the collapsed section, right at the fork, down the slope where water pooled in stagnant darkness. After 20 minutes of walking, they heard voices. Silas extinguished his lantern. They moved forward in darkness, following the sound. Light ahead. A chamber. The old junction of Shaft 7. Mason Cord sat on a crate, drinking from a bottle. His men were scattered around the chamber, some sleeping, some playing cards. And in the corner, tied to a support beam, was Rose. She was conscious. Her face was bruised. Her dress was torn, but her eyes were fierce, unbroken. Silas counted the men. 8, as expected, all armed. The odds were not good. He looked at Caleb, at Harlow. They nodded. They understood what had to be done. Silas took out paper and pencil. In the dim light from the distant chamber, he wrote a plan. Simple, brutal, necessary. Caleb would circle around to the far entrance, create a distraction. Harlow would go left, cutting off the escape route. Silas would go straight in fast and hard, focused only on getting to Rose. It was a plan that would likely get them all killed. But it was the only plan they had. They split up. Silas waited in the darkness, counting his breaths, calming his mind the way he had learned in the war. He thought about Rose, about Sarah, about all the people he had failed to save. Not this time. This time he would save her or die trying. A gunshot echoed through the tunnels. Caleb's signal. Silas moved. He burst into the chamber with his rifle raised, shot the first man before anyone could react. The second man went for his gun. Silas shot him through the chest. Chaos erupted. Mason's men scattered, diving for cover, returning fire. Bullets ricocheted off stone. Lanterns shattered plunging parts of the chamber into darkness. From the far tunnel, Caleb appeared, firing methodically. 2 more men went down. From the left, Harlow emerged with a pistol he had taken from one of the dead deputies. He fired twice. Missed both times, but the distraction was enough. Silas crossed the chamber in 4 strides, reached Rose, cut her bonds with his knife. She collapsed into his arms. He held her for 1 heartbeat, then pushed her toward the tunnel. "Run," he said, knowing she could not hear, but hoping she understood. Rose shook her head. She picked up a fallen rifle, pointed it at Mason Cord. Mason had taken cover behind a ore cart. He was reloading, unhurried, confident. "You should have stayed hidden, Thorne," Mason called out. "Now you're going to watch her die. Then I'm going to kill you slow." He raised his pistol, aimed at Rose. Silas threw himself in front of her. The bullet hit him in the shoulder. He went down hard. Rose's mouth opened in a scream. No sound emerged, only a strangled gasp of air forced through a throat that had never learned to shape words. But the silence of that scream was louder than any sound she could have made. Harlow stepped out from behind the support. "I'm not going to let you do this." He aimed at Rose's head. Harlow stepped out from behind the support beam, put his gun against the back of Mason's skull. "Drop it." Mason froze. "I said drop it." The pistol clattered to the floor. Harlow's hand was shaking. He had killed before, ordered deaths before, but never like this. Never face to face. "You're not going to shoot me, Judge. You don't have it in you anymore." "You're right," Harlow said. "I don't." He lowered the gun. Mason smiled, started to turn. Harlow smashed the pistol across Mason's temple. The big man dropped like a stone. Caleb had finished off the last of Mason's men. The chamber was littered with bodies, the air thick with gun smoke and the copper smell of blood. Rose knelt beside Silas. His shoulder was bleeding badly. She pressed her hands against the wound, trying to stop the flow. Silas looked up at her, managed a smile. "I'm all right, just a scratch." Rose shook her head, tears streaming down her face. She pressed harder. Caleb came over with a torn piece of cloth. "Here, we need to bind it tight. Can you ride?" "I can ride." Harlow stood over Mason's unconscious form. For a moment he looked like he might shoot the man anyway. Then he spat and turned away. They made their way back through the tunnels. Silas leaned on Rose, his good arm around her shoulders. She supported his weight without complaint. When they emerged into the pre-dawn cold, Silas collapsed. The blood loss was too much. His vision swam. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was Rose's face, her mouth forming words he could not hear but understood completely. "Don't leave me. Please don't leave me." He wanted to tell her he would not. Wanted to tell her so many things. But the darkness was pulling him down, and he could not fight it. Silas woke 3 days later in Sheriff Wade's house. His shoulder was bandaged. A doctor sat beside the bed. "Welcome back," the doctor said. "You lost a lot of blood. Thought we might lose you." "Rose? Where's Rose?" "She's fine. Been sitting in that chair for 3 days straight. Only left when we forced her to eat." Silas turned his head. Rose was asleep in a chair beside the bed, her head resting on the mattress near his hand. He reached out and touched her hair gently. She woke instantly, saw his eyes open, her face transformed with relief and joy. She grabbed paper and wrote, "You're awake. Thank God you're awake." Silas smiled. "Can't get rid of me that easy." Over the next week he healed. Rose stayed by his side. They played cards. She drew pictures. He taught her more lip reading. They did not talk much about what had happened in the mine. Some things did not need words. Mason Cord and the 2 surviving members of his gang were arrested. They would hang alongside Judge Harlow when the territorial marshal arrived. Harlow himself was back in a cell under heavy guard this time, but something had changed in him. The arrogance was gone. The fear, too. He seemed almost peaceful. When Silas was well enough to walk, he went to see Harlow one last time. "Thank you," Silas said, "for helping save her." Harlow shook his head. "I didn't do it for you. I did it for Eleanor. For the daughter I failed. Maybe in some small way saving Rose balanced the scales." "Nothing balances the scales for murder." "I know, but it's something. It's more than I had before." Silas looked at this broken man who had once ruled with such power. "For what it's worth, I think your daughter would be proud of what you did in that mine." Harlow's eyes glistened. "Do you really think so?" "I do." 2 weeks later, the territorial marshal arrived with a company of federal marshals. The trial was brief. The evidence overwhelming. Harlow Mason and the 2 others were sentenced to death by hanging. The execution was set for the following week. Silas and Rose did not attend. They had seen enough death. Instead, they rode out to a hill overlooking Elk Crossing and sat in the grass, watching the town below. Rose wrote, "What happens now?" Silas wrote back, "Whatever you want. We could stay here, or we could go to Denver, or California, or anywhere." "What do you want?" "I want you to be happy. That's all I've ever wanted." Rose smiled. She wrote, "I think I want to stay. There are people here who need help. People like me who can't speak. I want to learn how to help them." "That's a good dream. Will you stay with me?" Silas took her hand. "I'll stay with you until the day I die." "That's a promise." They sat together on the hill as the sun set over the mountains. A man and his daughter bound by survival and something deeper than blood. Bound by the choice to stay when leaving would have been easier. Below them, the town of Elk Crossing prepared for a new chapter, one without fear, one where justice had been served and the truth had won. It was not a perfect ending. Some wounds would never fully heal. Some families would grieve forever. But it was a beginning, and sometimes that was enough. 6 months passed. The hangings had been carried out. Harlow Mason and the others were buried in unmarked graves outside the town limits. The mine was officially shut down. A federal investigation had confirmed everything Vincent Gardner had documented. Millions in stolen gold, dozens of murdered men, a conspiracy that had reached into the highest levels of the territorial government. Reforms were enacted, new safety laws for miners, new oversight for judges. The scandal had rocked Wyoming and led to changes that would protect workers for generations to come. In Elk Crossing, life slowly returned to normal. The families of the dead miners received compensation from Harlow's seized assets. It was not enough to bring back loved ones, but it allowed widows to keep their homes, children to continue their education. Martha Klein used her settlement to open a boarding house. She gave free rooms to families who had lost their breadwinners, creating a community of mutual support. Jonas Pritchett stopped drinking, found work as a carpenter, built a monument in the town square listing the names of the 47 men who had died in the mines. So they would never be forgotten. Reverend Elway held a memorial service. 200 people attended. They sang hymns and shared memories and wept together and began the long process of healing. And Rose Gardner found her calling. She began working at the courthouse as an interpreter. When people who were deaf or mute had to testify or needed legal help, Rose was there. She taught them to write, taught them simple signs, gave them a voice in a system that had ignored them. She also started teaching classes twice a week. Sign language. She had learned it from books Silas ordered from Denver. Now she taught it to anyone who wanted to learn. Doctors, teachers, lawmen, parents of deaf children. Slowly word spread. People came from other towns to learn from the girl who had taken down a corrupt judge without speaking a single word. The Denver Post sent a reporter, wrote a feature story about Rose Gardner, the silent witness who had brought justice to Wyoming. The story was picked up by papers across the country. Letters arrived from deaf schools in the East, from families struggling to communicate with their children, from people who had never imagined that someone who could not speak could make such a difference. Rose read every letter, answered every one. Her correspondence filled notebooks, and through it all, Silas was there, proud, protective, present. One evening, as they sat together in their cabin, Rose wrote, "I've been thinking about something." "What?" "About my real parents. Whoever left me at that church, I used to be angry at them, thought they didn't want me. But now I wonder if maybe they couldn't keep me. If maybe they were poor or sick or desperate. And leaving me at a church with a note asking people to love me, maybe that was the most loving thing they could do." Silas read her words carefully, then wrote, "That's a very generous way to think about it. I've had too much anger. I want to try forgiveness instead, even for people who don't deserve it." "You're wiser than most people twice your age." Rose smiled. "I had good teachers. Vincent taught me courage. Mother taught me love. And you taught me that family is a choice we make every day." Silas felt his throat tighten. He wrote, "I'm proud to be your father. I'm proud to be your daughter." They sat in comfortable silence watching the fire. Outside snow began to fall, the first snow of winter, the world turning white and clean. Rose picked up her sketchbook. She had been working on a new project, a book of drawings documenting everything that had happened. As she drew, Silas watched her. This girl. As she drew, Silas watched her. This girl who had come into his life through tragedy and transformed it into something meaningful. He thought about Sarah, about the day she had asked him to marry her, how she had been direct, practical. No romance, just necessity. "I need someone to protect Rose," she had said. "I need someone strong. Are you that person?" And he had said yes without really understanding what he was promising. Now he understood. Being a father was not about biology or obligation. It was about showing up every day, about choosing to stay when leaving would be easier, about loving someone so much that their happiness became more important than your own comfort. He had failed at that with Sarah, had kept himself distant, held back, never fully committed. But with Rose he had learned, had grown, had become the man he should have been all along. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Caleb Ross stood outside brushing snow from his coat. "Evening, Silas. Rose. Sorry to disturb you, but I have some news." They invited him in. He sat by the fire warming his hands. "The territorial governor has appointed a new judge for this district, young fellow from Helena. Seems honest, but he's asked for help setting up the court. Needs a clerk, someone who knows the local cases, the local people." He looked at Silas. "I recommended you." Silas blinked. "Me, I'm not a lawyer." "No, but you're honest, smart, fair-minded, and this community trusts you. The judge wants to meet with you next week." Silas looked at Rose. She was nodding enthusiastically, writing on her pad. She showed him, "You should do it. You'd be good at it." "I don't know the first thing about running a courthouse." Caleb smiled. "Then you'll learn, same as the rest of us." Over the next months, Silas took the job. It was strange at first being back in a courthouse after so many years, but he found he was good at it. Good at organizing, good at dealing with people, good at making sure everyone got a fair hearing. And Rose worked alongside him, the clerk and the interpreter, father and daughter, partners in justice. They made a good team. One year after the trial that had changed everything, on a warm spring morning, Silas took Rose to visit Sarah's grave. They had moved her body from the burned cabin site to the cemetery in Elk Crossing. Vincent Gardner was buried nearby. Together in death as they had been in life, watching over the town they had tried to save. Silas placed flowers on both graves. Rose knelt and touched the headstone with her mother's name, Sarah Gardner Thorne, beloved mother. brave soul. She died protecting what she loved. Rose knelt and placed her notebook on the grave open to a page she'd written the night before. "Mother, I found my voice, not the way you expected, but I found it. Thank you for everything. I love you. I always will." Silas placed his own note beside hers. "Sarah, I failed you in life, but I kept your daughter safe. I hope that counts for something. Rest easy. Your legacy lives on." They stood together in silence, the words on the grave speaking for them both. They stood together in the quiet cemetery surrounded by the names of the dead, feeling the presence of the past all around them. Finally, Rose tugged on Silas's sleeve. She had one more place to visit. They walked to the newer section of the cemetery, to a plain marker that read simply, Ephraim Harlow. No dates, no epitaph. Just a name. Rose placed a small sketch on his grave. It was the drawing Eleanor Harlow had made, the one of herself, singing. Harlow had given it to Rose in the jail cell. Now she returned it so father and daughter could be together. Beneath the drawing she left a note. "You were a bad man who did terrible things, but at the end you tried to be better. I hope you found peace. I hope Eleanor was waiting for you. I hope you're both singing now in a place where voices aren't needed because souls speak directly to souls." Silas read the note and felt tears prick his eyes. They left the cemetery hand in hand, walking back toward town, toward the future, toward a life they were building together one day at a time. 5 years later. Rose Gardner Thorne stood in the main courtroom of the Wyoming Territorial Court in Cheyenne. She was 22 years old now, poised and confident. Her hair was pinned up in a professional style. She wore a simple but elegant dress. Beside her stood a deaf man accused of theft. He was terrified, unable to understand the proceedings. The lawyers spoke too fast. The judge's words were meaningless noise. But Rose was there. She stood beside him and interpreted everything, not just translating words, but explaining concepts, making sure he understood his rights, making sure he could tell his story. The man signed his testimony. Rose wrote it down for the court. The truth came out. He had not stolen anything. He had been falsely accused by someone who knew he could not defend himself. The judge dismissed the charges. The man wept with relief. He signed to Rose, "Thank you, you saved my life." Rose signed back, "We save each other. That's what people do." After the trial, reporters gathered around her. They always did. Rose Gardner had become famous. The girl who had brought down a corrupt empire, the advocate for the voiceless, the interpreter who had changed the justice system. "Miss Thorne, what's next for you?" a reporter asked. Rose wrote on her pad, "I'm opening a school for deaf children, so they never have to feel voiceless again. And your father, will he help?" "My father will always help. That's what fathers do." The reporter smiled. "You mean Silas Thorne, the court administrator?" Rose nodded. But in her heart, she was also thinking of Vincent Gardner, who had died to protect the truth, and even of Ephraim Harlow, who had saved her life in his final act of redemption. She had been raised by many fathers. Vincent gave her truth. Harlow gave her unexpected grace. And Silas gave her constancy. Each had taught her something valuable. Vincent taught her that truth was worth dying for. Harlow taught her that even the worst people could find grace. And Silas taught her that love was not given freely, but earned through presence, through sacrifice, through choosing to stay when leaving would be easier. That evening, Rose returned to Elk Crossing. She would always return to Elk Crossing. This was home. Silas was waiting on the porch of their cabin. He had added a second floor 2 years ago, more room for books, for drawings, for the life they were building. Rose climbed down from the stagecoach and ran to him. She was too old to run to her father like a child, but she did it anyway. He caught her in a hug. "How did the trial go?" She wrote, "We won. The man is free." "Good. I'm proud of you." "I learned from the best." They went inside. Caleb Ross was there visiting, as he often did. He and Silas had become close friends over the years. He was married now to a school teacher from Denver. They had 2 children. Lily Wade was there too, now 17, helping Rose organize the plans for the new school. They all sat around the table and talked late into the night, about the school, about the changes coming to Wyoming, about the future. And Rose realized something as she looked around the table. This was family. Not the family she was born into, but the family she had found. The family that had formed in the crucible of tragedy and choice. Later, alone with Silas, Rose wrote, "Do you ever wish things had been different? That Mother hadn't died? That we hadn't had to fight?" Silas thought for a long moment, then wrote, "I wish your mother was alive. I wish she could see the woman you've become. But I don't wish the fight hadn't happened, because that fight made us who we are. Made me finally understand what it means to be a father. Made you discover your strength. Sometimes I miss her so much it hurts." "I know, me too. Do you think she'd be proud of us?" "I think she's watching, and I think she's smiling." Rose leaned her head on Silas's shoulder. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn low. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead. The mountains stood eternal. The world turned indifferent to human joy and sorrow. But in a small cabin in Wyoming, a father and daughter sat together, bound by the unbreakable truth that family is forged in fire, not inherited through birth. 20 years later, Rose Gardner Thorne stood before the Wyoming State Legislature. She was 42 years old. Gray touched her temples. Lines creased her eyes from years of squinting to read lips and expressions. But she was still fierce, still brilliant, still fighting. She had been invited to speak about a bill that would require all public schools to offer education for deaf students, to provide interpreters in courtrooms and hospitals, to recognize sign language as a legitimate form of communication. She could not speak to the legislature directly, but she did not need to. She had brought her drawings, 20 years of documentation, the faces of people she had helped, the stories she had collected, the lives she had changed. She stood at the front of the chamber and held up each drawing one by one. Let the images speak for themselves. A deaf child learning to read, a deaf woman testifying in court, a deaf man voting for the first time, finally able to understand the ballot. The legislators watched in silence. Some were moved to tears. When she finished, she wrote on a large board, "The voiceless are not powerless, they just need someone to listen." The bill passed unanimously. Rose walked out of the Capitol building into the spring sunshine. Silas was waiting for her. He was 68 now, white-haired, moving a bit slower, but still strong, still present. "How did it go?" he asked. She wrote, "We won." "You always do." "Not always, but enough." They walked together through Cheyenne's streets, stopped for lunch at a small cafe, talked about the future. Silas's health was declining. They both knew it. He had maybe 5 years left, maybe less. Rose wrote, "When you're gone, I'll miss you every day." "I'll miss you too. But I'll also be at peace, because I'll know you're all right. You're strong. You're capable. You don't need me anymore." "I'll always need you." "No, you'll always want me. There's a difference. And that difference is what makes me proud." Rose smiled through tears. They finished lunch and walked to the train station. Rose was going back to Elk Crossing. Silas was staying in Cheyenne for a conference on judicial reform. Before she boarded, she hugged him tight. He whispered, though she could not hear, "I love you, daughter." She felt the words through his chest, felt the vibration of his voice, the rumble of emotion beneath his ribs. She pulled back and took his hand, placed it over her heart, then placed her own hand over his heart. The gesture said everything, no words needed, no voice required. "I love you, you are my father. We are bound by choice, not chance. And that makes us family." He understood. He had always understood her. She smiled through tears, then turned and boarded the train. Silas Thorne died in his sleep 3 years later. He was 71 years old. He died peacefully in his own bed in the cabin he had shared with Rose. Rose found him in the morning, knew immediately he was gone. The stillness of death was different from the stillness of sleep. She sat beside his bed and held his hand, did not cry, not yet, just sat with him saying goodbye in the silence they had always shared. She thought about the night he had saved her from the burning cabin, the night her mother died and Silas became her father not by law, but by choice. She thought about all the years since, the fights they had won, the lives they had changed, the family they had built from wreckage and will. She thought about Vincent Gardner, her father by adoption, who had taught her that truth matters. She thought about Sarah Thorne, her mother by choice, who had taught her that love is action. She thought about Silas Thorne, her father, through years of quiet presence, of showing up every day, even when grief made it hard to breathe. Finally, she wrote in her notebook, though no one would read it but her, "Thank you for teaching me that silence is not weakness, that a voice is not just sound, but presence, that family is who we choose to keep, that justice is worth fighting for even when the fight seems impossible. That love is shown in staying not just in grand gestures, but in quiet daily commitment. You were the best father I could have asked for, not because you were perfect, because you tried. Every single day you tried. Rest now, you've earned it." She folded the note and placed it in Silas's hand. Then she went to the cemetery and dug his grave herself. She would not let anyone else do it. This was her job, her final act of love. She buried him between Sarah and Vincent, the three parents who had shaped her life, together now in death as they had been fragmented in life. On his headstone she had carved Silas Thorne, 1834 to 1905. Father friend, fighter for justice, he taught the voiceless to speak. Rose lived for another 47 years. She died in 1945 at the age of 82. By then her school had educated over 2,000 deaf children. Her advocacy had led to laws protecting the rights of the disabled across 12 states. Her drawings had been published in 3 books documenting the fight for justice in Wyoming and inspiring similar movements nationwide. She never married, never had children of her own. Her students were her children. Her cause was her family. When she died, the governor of Wyoming ordered flags flown at half-mast. Newspapers across the country wrote obituaries celebrating her life. But the best tribute came from a deaf woman in Chicago who wrote to the Elk Crossing newspaper, "I never met Rose Thorne, but her work saved my life. When I was 12, I stood trial for a crime I did not commit. I could not defend myself. No one could understand me, but a lawyer in that courtroom had read about Rose, had learned about interpreters. He demanded one be provided. I was acquitted because someone finally heard my truth. Rose Thorne gave me a voice. She gave voices to thousands of us. We will never forget her." Rose was buried in Elk Crossing Cemetery between Silas on one side and an empty plot on the other. That plot was reserved for anyone who wanted to be remembered as part of her family. Over the years, several of her students chose to be buried there, creating in death the family they had chosen in life. On her headstone, the words she had requested, "Rose Gardner Thorne, 1872 to 1954. Daughter of many fathers, mother to the voiceless, she spoke through silence and changed the world." And beneath that carved small but clear, "The truth needs no voice, only courage." Today, the cabin where Silas and Rose lived is a museum, the Voice of Silence Museum. It houses Rose's drawings, her notebooks, her correspondence with deaf communities across America. Every year, thousands visit, deaf and hearing alike. They come to see the story, to remember that justice is possible, that one person armed with nothing but truth and courage can bring down empires. In the main room hangs Rose's most famous drawing, the one she made the night before the trial, a girl standing in a courtroom holding a pen like a sword. And beside it, in Eleanor Harlow's childish hand, the drawing of a girl on a stage, singing without sound. 2 girls, 2 generations, 2 voices that spoke through silence. Together, they changed the world, not with speeches or violence, with truth, with love, with the stubborn insistence that everyone deserves to be heard, even those who cannot speak, especially those who cannot speak, because in the end, the loudest voice is not the one that shouts, it is the one that refuses to be silenced. The end.